This is a slug, and so is this, and yes, even this. They can be found in many shapes, sizes, colors, and habitats, and some even break dance. Together with snails, these slimy crawling creatures belong to the gastropods, which make up the majority of mollusk species. Like squids and octopuses, slugs are mollusks who used to have a shell in the past, but have since lost them. But why would you give up something so powerfully protective like a shell? Why were slugs able to branch out into so many crazy-looking species? Are we sure that they're really missing a shell? What even are slugs? Why are slugs? I'm a biologist, which is why I like to collect dead things and put them in jars. Last year, I found a dead slug outside, and I dissected it to prepare for this video. Inside, I found this. That is its shell. Every single species of slug either has or had a shell at some point in their life. There's a big range in size there. This other common species is just hiding a few microscopic grains. They are remnants of a shell, made of a mix of proteins, fats, and mostly calcium carbonate. That's the mineral that makes up limestone and chalk. Many squid have a bit of shell remaining inside their bodies too. It looks just like a bit of plastic, and it serves more as a structural support rather than any kind of storage. In terrestrial slugs, the stored calcium can be used to coat their eggs in a thin protective layer, and some species use it to make something called love darts. Most snails and slugs are hermaphrodites, meaning that each one is both male and female and carries both anatomies. Love darts are arrow-shaped crystals of calcium carbonate, which grow to pretty decent size. And they might have even been the inspiration between the originally Greek and then later Roman myth of Cupid. When two snails really hit it off after an hours-long mating ritual and they align their bodies together, each will shoot one of these Cupid's arrows from a hole next to their head. It doesn't actually matter which part of their partner's body they stab it into. Their head, internal organs, just straight through to the other side, because all the dart has to do is to transfer some slime. This slime carries hormones that will increase their partner's fertility. It's helpful for later when they're trying to fertilize each other by entangling head penises together. Sea slugs don't have love darts, and most don't have internal shells either. Instead, they have external shells, real shells, but only for the first 20 or so days after hatching. At this stage, we call them veligers, or larvae. Once they're big enough, they will settle down on the ocean floor, and they cast off their shell, transforming into a colorful slug. They do this by a process I like to call the untwist. Inside an egg, a baby snail looks just like a tiny little slug for the first 3 or so days. Then their body begins to split in half. Organs are pushed into a sac that is covered by a layer of skin called the mantle. Glands on the mantle surface produce the mixture of liquids that solidify into a hard shell. While this happens, the sac begins to twist around, moving the organs closer towards its head. The benefit is that the snails will have an easier time balancing the heavy weight on top, and it means that they can pull in their head before their foot. The downside is that they now poop out the front. But a baby slug also undergoes some of this process. They form an organ sac, they twist it, but then they untwist it. This can happen after hatching, like in the sea slug examples, or while they're still inside their egg. In that case, they produce a much smaller and flatter shell, just like we've seen. During this process, the organs descend into their back. The edges of the mantle grow over and enclose the exposed bit of shell that formed, and a slug with a thin internal shell is born. That mantle then covers them like a little blanket, and they poop more out of their side. But hold on. In this species, the shell still peeks out from under the mantle, and here is a snail whose shell is much too small. Nature is never as black and white as we often subconsciously assume. These are semi-slugs. They take up the fuzzy space between what is clearly a slug and what is clearly a snail. There's a whole spectrum between them in terms of shell size and degree of mantle coverage. When seeing these 3 different body types of gastropod, perhaps without even realizing it, we instinctively start putting them in order. It's more satisfying this way, isn't it? But we've seen that ordering them from small shells to big shells doesn't actually reflect how a snail grows a shell. Throughout their whole development, the ratio of body to shell size will generally stay the same. Perhaps it could reflect how a shell evolved then. A general observation of the universe is that things become more complex over time. It's a common pattern. Think of how we went from tools made of wood, stone, and bone to computers and AI. But this too is a trap. Slug shells are what remain of a complete shell. They're not a shell in the process of becoming one. The shrinking of the shells is itself an extra step of complexity, on top of being able to make one at all. Although this really isn't a hugely complicated leap. A shell is an easy thing to lose. Not literally. Snail shells are firmly attached to their soft bodies by a muscle. No, the other kind of muscle. If you want to remove snails from their shell because you're cruel or French, you can do so by severing that muscle or by boiling them to dissolve the organic glue that connects it to the shell. Now, all it takes to radically change a shell and become more slug-like is a change in timing. There are three options here. You can stop growing the shell early, you can continue growing the mantle for longer and cover the shell entirely, or you can reverse the process of twisting by activating a different muscle. It just takes one or a few very minor changes in their DNA for this to happen. Usually, all three options are happening at once. When we look more broadly at gastropod DNA and try to arrange their species based on how many differences in DNA we find between them, we get an evolutionary tree. And when we highlight our three main body categories, we see something perhaps quite unexpected. They are scattered all over the tree. Here are some land slugs. Here are sea slugs. Even these two very similar looking species from my own backyard are represented in these two different places. Each is more related to snails than to each other. While these plots each represent between 1 and a few thousand species of slugs, what we don't see is one single cluster. Slugs are not one happy family. If we assume that the last common ancestor of gastropods today had a shell, then snail shells' size decreased significantly at least 22 times in history. This direction of snail to slug makes the most sense, because losing shells is the simplest. If snails all descended from a slug ancestor, that would mean that shells independently evolved at least 22 times. And mind you, that could happen. Calcium carbonate shells have evolved in a bunch of other non-mollusks too. They look similar at a surface level, but when we look at the genes necessary for development, those shells differ wildly between each group. While the genes that are involved with snail shell development are mostly identical in every species of snail. So, slugs and semi-slugs don't represent their own family. Many separate clusters of species have devolved their shell many separate times. Does that mean we should call all of them snails? Like a kind of surname that's being passed along? That would make the words slug, semi-slug, and snail just a specific type of shape a snail can have. Slug is a pretty popular shape even outside of snails. Maybe you've already spotted something uncanny about these creatures, because they're imposters. These are marine flatworms, and are only very distantly related to slugs. Some specifically mimic one exact toxic sea slug species, and many go so far as to make the folds of their body resemble eye stalks. On land we can find leeches who can be mistaken for slugs. While they don't specifically mimic them, their soft bodies are adapted to similar habitats as them, automatically leading to some resemblance. Even 550 million years ago, when all of life was confined to the ocean, before they even evolved shells at all, the very first mollusks were likely crawling around like a slug. The snail shell is one of life's most astonishing organs. It likely began as a thick mucus layer on top of those ancient naked mollusks. This would have served to protect against microbes, parasites, or other nibbling creatures. They were grazing away at the dense mat of bacteria and algae growing on the seafloor. Just before the first shelled creatures appeared in the fossil record, ocean conditions have been changing. Due to the variable geothermal activity of our living planet, underwater volcanoes became more active for a while. They spewed boiling hot water containing ions such as calcium and carbonate, the latter of which gradually made the waters less acidic. These ions can be toxic in high amounts, and will inevitably be ingested by our early mollusks grazing the microbial lawn. Their bodies may have been able to remove those ions by expelling them along with the mucus on their back. Here, calcium and carbonate could react, and they hardened that mucus layer as a side effect. This would turn out to be very helpful, because the influx of calcium had some other nasty effects. The bodies of hungry creatures around them were putting the excess into developing hard teeth and strong jaws. The better to eat tasty mollusks with. Over time, in the long struggle for survival, Shells have become a highly complex and diverse organ. Snails spread around the world, and their shells made it possible to occupy new habitats and find new food sources when conditions changed and their microbial mats disappeared. Many dozens of times, snails were able to make the transition from ocean to tidal pools and onto dry land. Here, a shell doesn't just protect them from creatures both micro and massive, but from burning in sunlight or drying to a crisp in the wind. But to all great benefits in one condition, there can be even greater drawbacks in another. Shells are heavy, and they take a lot of resources to make, not just in terms of energy, but calcium carbonate, which is much more difficult to find on land where you're not surrounded by it 24/7. With a shell, you drag around your own supply of moisture and safety. There's plenty of both to effortlessly be found on land, underneath rocks or between cracks, places that are hard to get into when you're carrying a shell. Many sea snails are able to camouflage themselves amongst the rocks, or by being covered by other oceanic life. No concerns here about moisture, of course, but they faced a different issue, where losing a shell also happened to be the best outcome. Even sea snails need oxygen, which they normally find dissolved in the water around them. But because their organs are kept safely inside that shell, that includes the gill that they breathe with. All mollusks have 2 gills, but all gastropods form an exception. When snails undergo that twisting of the sac full of organs on their back, the organs on the right side have so little space remaining that only the left gill is able to form. Slugs have been undergoing the twist for so much of their history that even when they untwist, the means of making that second gill have been completely lost. Something about the twist might even be crucial for their development, because no slug seems to be able to completely prevent it. Most of the time, having just one gill isn't a hindrance at all, but as we know, the world around them is always changing. Most lineages of sea slugs around today first appeared during the warm Cretaceous period, the last era of dinosaur Rome. High oceanic temperatures means that dissolved oxygen has enough energy to easily escape the water and go up into the air. The oxygenation of the water lowers, and a lot of ocean life could periodically struggle to breathe. The more water you can rush past your gills, the more oxygen you'll be able to pick up. This is a problem when you have only one gill enclosed in a shell with just a small opening leading inside. Through accidental trial and error, best strategy for survival turns out to be keeping the shell around for their larval state, and then slipping out of it once their bodies get bigger and their oxygen needs rise significantly. Their exposed, frilly gills can filter a lot more water than before, and so being naked helps you live. Without a shell, alternative defense mechanisms had to take over, but the exposure of their soft skin also provided new methods of protection. Many sea slugs eat toxic algae, anemones, or sponges, and they can place those toxins into their upper skin without getting sick themselves. Strange tendrils and extra tentacles evolved to increase that surface area, for even more stinging. In some species, this also helps them blend in with their own food. This is a coral, and this is the slug that eats them. Some slug bodies found another way to up their survival odds by placing whole body parts from their food into their skin. This species, also known as the leaf sheep, eats photosynthetic algae. Although the algae are absorbed, their chloroplasts are kept intact. These are the small green organelles in a plant cell that are responsible for turning sunlight, water, and CO2 into sugars, and these are now placed into the slug's tentacles. Here they will continue to make sugars from sunlight, which may give the slug a little extra energy boost, thereby becoming one of the only multicellular photosynthetic animal species that we know of. It's one thing to be toxic and dangerous, but to announce it to the world is even better. Many sea slugs gain bright colors and strong contrasts. By warning predators to not even think of taking a bite, both survive for longer. Creatures such as the gigantic sea hares take a more measured approach. Their bodies are camouflaged, but when threatened they can spray a bright pink ink, which they get by eating algae that have red chloroplasts. If possible, an even better strategy is to not even be seen at all. Many sea slugs, such as these, have removed as much pigment from their bodies as possible, becoming somewhat translucent. What remains visible is sometimes not even recognizable as a slug. I think the ghost nudibranch really takes the crown here. Does it go here, or? Even on land, some slugs can be brightly colored, like the banana slug and the rare hot pink slug that lives on one single volcano. But invisibility also pays off on land. Sometimes, slugs who look more like a leaf were able to survive better. This process of small advantages stacking over time works really, really well. If you just happen to look a little bit like a piece of poop, a few thousand years later, and bam! Now you look like shit. Time to go back to our semi-slugs. They have successfully survived with a whole host of colors and shapes as well. I know it may seem like they kind of draw the short end of the stick. Semi-slugs cannot crawl into their shrunken shells, but they may still struggle to squeeze themselves under rocks or cracks. For a snail to become a slug, in most cases, they would have to pass through this seemingly awkward and kind of inferior semi-slug stage. A snail wouldn't become a semi-slug if there's no advantage to it, and all semi-slugs would have rapidly become slugs if that's just so much better. So our question instead becomes, why are semi-slugs still a thing? Life isn't always under extreme pressure. The struggle for survival can be much more intense in some situations compared to others. About half of all semi-slug species we know today evolved their shape on small islands. Often, here there are few predators, and plenty of moisture and calcium blowing in from the sea. Having a shell just doesn't really help that much here, and the energy spent growing one can better be spent on getting busy with our head penises. If a shell isn't particularly useful, it will always begin to shrink. If conditions are chill enough, even the energy spent on the shell might not get in the way of making the most amount of offspring possible, so the species stays in its semi-slug stage. If conditions change or get worse, the slug shape may turn out to be the superior one after all. But once the genes to build a shell have ceased to function, it's almost impossible to get them back to working order again. Sluganization is a one-way route. There could be a particular benefit to being a semi-slug compared to the other two categories, one that we humans are unable to ever realize because by most definitions, we're not slugs. Although we do have a hard calcium-based structure hidden inside a soft body. Does that mean that medieval knights were human snails? They certainly seem to fight them a lot. Life is a lot different when seen through a pair of eye stalks. My backyard might seem like one single, pretty boring ecosystem to me and you, but it's a smorgasbord of little nooks and crannies, forming pockets of different temperatures and moistures, and it provides a whole buffet of different food sources to eat from. It's why slugs and snails can coexist in this place. They each occupy a slightly different niche, and so one doesn't necessarily outcompete the other. Losing a shell has opened up many niches to slugs that snails would never be able to use. And where there's opportunities, there is life, even in some of the weirdest places. A few shelled snails can swim in the open ocean. They're called sea butterflies, which are quite similar to the larval sea slugs. These creatures are hunted by a relative of theirs that has lost their shell, the sea angel. They generally hunt by lying in wait, then bursting forth a set of mouth tentacles when they sense a snail nearby. Without a shell, the sea angels can be almost invisible, and they perform great bursts of speed to feed on creatures otherwise quite difficult to capture. Let's dive deeper. This is not a fish, but no prizes anymore for guessing what it really is. This slug has a foot that has flattened sideways, letting it swim towards a specific genus of jellyfish that it senses with those long, hammerhead-like tentacles. They lay their eggs inside of them too. Their larvae latch on and start eating the jellyfish from the inside out. But we can go deeper still, into the midnight zone, 4 kilometers deep. No light can make its way here from the surface, and we're under crushing pressures. Here we find these transparent creatures, who were only confirmed to be a slug just last year, 20 years after first being spotted. In the dark, they light up with bioluminescent bacteria in their skin, probably to scare off predators. They can even drop and then later regrow some of those tentacles, which continue to glow and distract their enemy while they make a somewhat quick getaway. That strange hood at the front is part of their mouth, which works like a net. They take huge gulps of water and trap moving prey, and then filter out the water, kind of like a whale does. They're not the only sea slugs to adopt this strategy. 2 other creatures have similar structures, but each time, this type of feeding has developed independently. Their mouths are similar tools to suit a similar hunting style for similar prey. We call this pattern convergent evolution. It's exactly what happened to slugs and semi-slugs in general, where distantly related lineages have converged onto the same body type. It just keeps turning out to be a really good solution. Land and sea slugs live very different lives, but losing an external shell can solve more than just one potential problem. Convergent evolution is one way to answer our main question, why are slugs? There are thousands of other ways and details to explain it too, all of which approach the question from different perspectives. We always need a combination of these perspectives to accurately describe reality. But while looking at many of these stories of slugs today, I think one other pattern stood out in particular. It's often called environmental context dependency. All it really means is that everything in life is affected by its context, by what's around them, in the broadest sense of the word. Life and its environment are connected by moisture and temperatures, by its prey and predators, by the kind of minerals around them, and even by what kind of videos a bunch of apes are making about them. If you know some more cool slug facts, please share them with all of us in the comments. Thank you for listening, and subscribe to catch the next Broadly Speaking.